Hey, friends, some of you wanted a deeper dive into the Smuggler's Matrix, which came from the talk Beyond Influence. So let's do that now. We were talking about the digital marketers and the recipe that they've taught for many years. And many of you know the ingredients of their recipe: reciprocity, liking, authority, social proof, and the rest. And some of you said you didn't know those terms. So I just put a quick explainer of each. So if you're in a sales webinar, and the salesperson is telling you about their authority, how they've done this for years. That's the authority principle. And if they say, here, look at all these testimonials, people just like you have also bought this, they're trying to use social proof. So there is a fixed recipe that the digital marketers have taught for years. Some of these are influence principles, and some of those are not, such as urgency and bonus stacking, as we said. These are popular tactics, but these are not influence principles. So the question was, where do these influence principles come from? Why does everybody use the same tactics when trying to sell? And they all happen to come from the same book written by Dr. Robert Cialdini nearly 40 years ago, called Influence. And if you turn to the table of contents of that book, there they are: reciprocity, social proof, liking, authority, and the rest. But look at that first chapter, Weapons of Influence. That's a curious name for a chapter. And Dr. Cialdini called it that because these are powerful psychological principles that create an automatic, mindless compliance when used correctly. Get people to say yes because of the psychology that's built into them. So Dr. Cialdini calls individuals who use these principles incorrectly in a way to try to persuade people when the principles don't exist. He calls them smugglers of influence. And we all know smugglers that use fake scarcity, fake urgency. They're trying to use a principle when it's not present in the situation. There's also fake social proof, fake authority as well. Smugglers also stack these principles. They bring all of these weapons into play at once. They use authority and social proof and scarcity and the rest to create a high pressure situation to try to bludgeon you into buying their stuff. That's why it feels so salesy when they use all these principles at once. So we all have been smuggled. We've all been in that situation where we bought something. We sometimes don't know why we bought it. We have buyer's remorse. It's often because you were faced with a smuggler who is using all the principles at once on you to create a real high pressure situation. I've asked this question to hundreds of individuals over the last 3 years. These are people who sell online. And I asked them, how does that feel when other people use these principles all at once on you to try to get you to buy? And look at their responses. About half, 48%, says, this makes me want to not buy. About 41% says it's annoying. 40% says it lowers their opinion of the person who uses these tactics on them. And about a third said too much high pressure. In fact, only 7.4% said, well, that's okay. That's just what we have to use. This is what we have to use to sell. That means 93% of small business owners, entrepreneurs, others that use these principles say it's not okay. And this is a real problem. If the digital marketer smugglers are teaching everyone, this is how you sell people, this is how you persuade people on your sales webinars, and 93% of the audience says this is annoying and makes them not trust the seller, that's a real problem. We're actually repelling people by using these principles like the smugglers do. So what's the solution? Dr. Cialdini would say, be a detective of influence. A detective is defined as one who uses the one principle that is best for the situation, who uses the principle that is present in the situation. So in my case, if I'm selling one of my courses or programs or services, I often use the principle of authority. Tell people I've been doing this for 30 years. I've worked with hundreds of companies. The situation that you're in is very similar to what I've done before, and this is what has worked. I don't then add scarcity and liking and the rest. That would be stacking. That would be being a smuggler. So a detective picks out the one principle that best suits the situation and then uses that, reveals it to the prospect in order to persuade them to make the right decision. So let's look at the smugglers versus detectives, and we'll talk about the matrix here. And that's the difference between weapons and levers. As I said in the 1984 book, the first chapter was called Weapons of Influence. Interestingly, in the revised book Influence, the chapter is now entitled Levers of Influence. And I believe that's because the earlier version that has been taken over by the digital marketers are using these principles as weapons all at once, like a smuggler. But what Dr. Cialdini is urging us to do is use the one principle that is best serves this situation, to use it as a lever to move your prospect to the right decision, to persuade them in an ethical way. So here's the smuggler's matrix. This is it all at once. I'll break it down here to show you where these terms and concepts come from. So we'll start at the bottom with influencer knowledge. You can be low to high on this concept, and it's simply, do you know the influence principles? Do you know which principle to use in which situation? Do you know which of the influence principles are your strengths or not your strengths? To the extent that you have high knowledge of that, you're on the right side of the quadrant. To the extent you don't, you're on the left side. On the y-axis is focus. On the lower quadrants, the focus for the person trying to persuade is transactional. They're looking to close the deal, to convert, to make sales. The person using more relationship building is in the upper quadrants, the individual that's trying to persuade for a win-win situation, to do what's best for the prospect. So that makes up our quadrants. On the lower right, of course, is our smuggler, the one who understands the principles well, teaches others, but is only interested in the transaction, making the sale. So here's our smuggler. And as you can see, he's using the principles as weapons and using all of the weapons at once. Here he is shooting authority and scarcity and liking and commitment and consistency all at once in hopes that one of them hits the target. The smuggler can do this because he has nearly unlimited resources. He has many arrows and a team and a huge email list, and he can fire these arrows all day long. We've all been smuggled, and we all know who the smuggler is. The problem is many of us that were new to selling online came into this arena, and we looked to the smuggler for answers. I did this myself when I came into online marketing. I looked around, I found the smuggler who was the one teaching others how to do this, and I imitated what I heard the smuggler tell me to do. I looked pretty much like this guy here. I was also using all the arrows at once, firing them in a direction. But as you can see, I didn't really know what I was doing because I was low on the influence knowledge scale. I didn't know where those principles had come from. I didn't know which ones were my strength. I just looked at what the smuggler was doing and said, here we go, firing all the arrows at once. But as you can see, this fella here is going to lose some of these arrows. They're going to get stuck up in a tree. It's very expensive to be muddling, because even if you hit the target, you don't know which arrow hit the target or why. So this is very frustrating. And that's why, in terms of the outcome, if you're on the left side of the quadrant, you're in the frustration outcome quadrant, because you can keep shooting arrows all day. You're making a couple of sales, not many. You're driving people away. You don't know what's working, why it is working, why it's not working. It's a bad situation to be in. You're not on the success side like the smuggler is. The third concept is the bungler. And what often happens is people who are muddling along, having learned from the smuggler, they decide at some point they've had enough. This feels wrong. I feel like I'm putting people under pressure. This feels salesy. I don't like to be sold in this way myself. Why am I selling to others in this way? And they give up the whole practice. They say, okay, I'm done with this. I'm going to just sell in a way that I think will work, a way that feels good. And here is our bungler. This young lady here is now shooting with her feet, which is very clever and creative, but it's a lot of effort to do this. She's not going to use all the arrows at once. Like the smuggler, she's throwing away the smuggler's tool. She's just going to go out there and start talking to people and trying to sell. It takes a lot of effort. And you notice she's still on the frustration side because she doesn't know the principle. She doesn't know which principle to use to persuade her audience to say yes. She just takes an arrow and aims and hopes to hit the target. So neither bunglers or muddlers are in a good position here. If you're muddling along, then even if you hit the target, you're not really sure which arrow hit and how to replicate that. Very expensive. To the bungler, you hit the target once in a while, but it's a lot of effort and a lot of wasted arrows. You don't want to be on the left side. You want to be on the right side. And who you want to be is her, the detective of influence. Notice that she took one arrow. She's using it as a lever. She's not using all the weapons at once. She takes one arrow, but she takes careful aim. She picked the arrow that best suits the situation. This might be authority, or it might be scarcity, it might be social proof. She takes careful aim and lets go. And if she misses the target, then she knows why. She'll take the next arrow, take careful aim, and shoot it into the target. She could even walk right up to the target and go doink and stick it right in the bullseye. That's because the detective knows how to use the principle. She's on the right side of the quadrant. She understands which principles work in which situations, which are her strengths. So the detective is effective, much more effective than the bungler using her feet. She's more efficient than the muddler who's shooting all the arrows at once, not knowing which one hits the target. And of course, far more ethical than the smuggler who's in it for the transaction and not for the win-win situation with their prospects. So when you're a detective of influence, it just feels comfortable. It feels natural, authentic. And being a detective, you build tremendous confidence because you're helping others, you're trying to create win-win situations, and you're using the psychological principles ethically. So that's where you want to be, a detective of influence. And of course, the key to doing this is understanding the influence principles. So you're high on the right side and that you are focused on creating win-win situations. So you're high on the relationship side as well. So there's the Smuggler's Matrix. You can take a screenshot of that. And if you have any questions, any ideas that you want to share about this, any other questions you have about the Smuggler's Matrix or the principles themselves, just connect us on LinkedIn and we'll talk more. Thanks much.